Welcome to my cabin in the woods. Never before has our deep longing to be surrounded by community, humans, wildlife, and nature, been so visceral, our inherent disconnection so clear. Our challenge is to reawaken our deep connections to all living beings and come together to save ourselves and to save habitat for wildlife. How do we do this? Our hope is that these conversations will open us to the incredible opportunity we have in this time of transition to reimagine from the ground up what is truly important, how we want to live on our earth, to apply our brilliant, creative human minds and our loving, intuitive hearts in the service of all life, to make a radical shift on our magical human journey from me to we. The rewards are so great. To understand that we're all one community of life, living in accordance with that realization gives us a profound sense of companionship, healing, and joy, and a thriving earth. The cabin on this living land, part of the Yellowstone to Yukon Wildlife Corridor, will serve as the base for a series of explorations that will bring global thought leaders together to share, learn, and expand our sense of community to truly include all life on Earth. This is our pilot conversation, and I'm so pleased to introduce our co-host, Karen Prisley. Karen brings a great sensitivity and deep experience as a transition coach and human resource manager. She has helped thousands of fellow travelers successfully navigate personal and career transitions with a focus on staying grounded during times of change, while noticing and pursuing the often unexpected possibilities that arise from the rubble. Living her own journey, brimming with unexpected possibilities, Karen is honored to currently work in the nonprofit sector as part of the leadership team at the Sharon D. Lund Foundation. Welcome, Karen.
Hi, Susan. It's an honor and such a joy to be with you today. Thank you. And I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I'd like to introduce Anne Loyola, our Assistant Director, who's going to give us some technical suggestions.
Hello, everyone. It's our hope that at the end of the program, we'll have about 10-15 minutes and we'll share and see if we can get some answers and responses back to you. Thank you again for joining us. And Susan, carry on.
Today's conversation is emerging from the pause, from fearful isolation to joyful transformation. It's going to highlight a three-part process for going from uncertainty to new beginnings. Karen?
Okay, hello everyone. Well, I thought I'd start us off today to kind of set the tone with a very short video clip. And this is a clip that was given to me by a friend of mine named Allison Cameron. And last year, Allison planted a bunch of milkweed in her yard. And so this spring, her garden is a butterfly haven. And she set out a goal that she was going to catch the exact moment when the chrysalis opened into a butterfly. And with a little bit of patience, she was able to do that about 2 weeks ago. So I'm going to make this attempt to share her video as a way to get us started. So I've watched that dozens of times and it still never fails to move me, that moment of new form showing up. But what you don't see in that video is what happens right before that. And that, of course, is the caterpillar. As we all know, the monarch butterfly comes from the caterpillar. And turns out the caterpillar's job once it's born, is just to consume as much as it possibly can. So it crawls along on the milkweed and it eats and eats and eats and eats, and it gets bigger and it sheds its skin, and then it crawls a little more and does it again and sheds its skin, and it does that up to 5 times. And then at some point, as far as we know, what happens is that appetite lever gets turned off, and that begins the process of transformation. And so they find a spot and they crawl and they hang into that upside down J, and they begin the process of creating the chrysalis. And it's just so extraordinary. And you might have even, so then once it's in the chrysalis, you might not know that it doesn't just sprout wings and grow color, develop color. The caterpillar actually melts down into goo. So if you were to open that chrysalis on day 3 or 4 or 5, it would be all liquid. And it's melted down into sort of into pure potential. And then these cells called imago cells kick in. And as far as we know, they have no purpose in the caterpillar, but once in the goo, they activate and they have the instructions to create the butterfly, which is pretty extraordinary. So that metaphor is pretty extraordinary, I think, for these times we're in, this moment of major transformation. And the idea of the change cycle, we all as humans go through it many times throughout our lives. And there was a man named William Bridges, who you mentioned, Susan, came up with this model. It's a 3-part model. And his kind of contribution or discovery was that major change starts with an ending. It starts with the dissolution of the caterpillar. That's what starts the transformation process. So for humans too, often our major changes start with endings. And this time we're in, this moment, is kind of rich with endings. And I know it's not always a comfortable topic. It's certainly not one I love. Endings can be really rough and difficult. And it can range, especially in this moment, it can range the whole span from, kind of mild discomfort of, being sad that your favorite restaurant is closed or you can't move around as easily, or, there's endings in sort of the way we're used to moving about, or people that are really struggling in terms of work, or, all the way to the gut-wrenching loss of losing somebody. So I think this time is holding some endings, and that is a place to begin to absorb some of the change that we're in. It's a necessary part of the cycle. Without an ending, there's no space for new beginnings. So it's a time for us to look at what might be ending.
And actually, one of the reasons we wanted to do this is because there's such a rich conversation between us that we really wanted to share it in these difficult and enormously exciting times. Partly because things are so traumatic now.
Yeah.
We don't want to hear anything negative. But if we can hear something negative in the context of a larger picture of going somewhere else, then it takes the unbearableness out of the pain and actually turns it into a sort of a richness as well as a sense of loss. So, no, we do need to talk about and completely honor the grief. And there's a lot of writing too about grief, not just about what's happening with the COVID. There's enormous grief about the environment. And I don't even like saying the words the environment, because then it's us versus them. And to me, that's right there is a division, like nature or the environment or the earth. We just hadn't, we've worked on it. We quite haven't figured out the language, how we can say it other than that. And then there's, I don't know if it's grief. You let me know your thoughts on it too, Karen. I don't know if it's grief alone or fear about endings of our way of life and what that means. It's not just the convenience, but we don't change that easily. We're not built that way to change that easily. And from my point of view, the incredible opportunity we have is to make real, profound, radical, in the sense of root change. It's an opportunity in our human journey to change everything. So we're not happy. We're ruining the earth and we're not even happy. Maybe it'd be worth it if we're happy, but we're not. It's only completely a lose-lose. And what if we could turn it into a win-win? And we're at a very exciting time, but in my point of view, we're also in a really, really delicate time. Overbalancing, fixing, or doing versus being and sensing, and not coming from the depth of our heart and our own deep wisdom. So somehow, if our conversation can do anything to help each of us connect better or more deeply to our own innate wisdom and our own sense of capacity to make change, each of us, because it's such a balance between, if each of us don't do it, it won't work. But my biggest worry, and on the other side, hope, is that we use this time not to make little changes, but to really take the opportunity to make a huge leap forward. And the opportunity of living on Earth in deep connection with other living beings, the sense of, as I said earlier, the sense of companionship and the joy. And if you want to be practical about it, the immune system benefits, I mean, on every single level. So that's that space, which you call the liminal space. You address that so beautifully and what it means and why it's so important before we move to the new beginnings.
Yeah, okay. So we'll talk about that. And I wanted to add one thing to your endings that was just so beautifully said, is that I think it's a process. You know, it's a process of shedding and honoring what has been and what is closing. And some of the things we need to let go of, and some of the things are hard to let go of. And both are okay. Both are real and true and part of the process. And as you mentioned, this liminal space is my favorite in the change process. It's why I became a transition coach, because for me, that in between is where the magic happens. When you've left the shore of what you've known, voluntarily or involuntarily, and you're looking out ahead, and you can see there's a beginning out there somewhere, but you don't necessarily know where or what it's going to be. That in-between space is full of possibility. It can be anxious and it can be uncertain because it's not formed, but it also can be absolutely rich with potential and possibility. So, and William Bridges, he developed that model, and I have a little chart here. We talked about endings, as you said. That can be a sense of anger, there can be sadness. We know the stages of grief. With deep transformation, there can be a longing to go back. I think a lot of us do have the sense, though, with this transformation that we probably aren't going back. We don't know what we're going to emerge into, but I think a number of people have the sense that maybe we aren't going to go back to the way it was. We're going to emerge into something new. But then, there can be a sense of loss with that, and really a disidentification. If we are over, we know ourselves in that old way, and so now we've got to come to know ourselves in a different way. And then this pause, Bridges calls it the neutral zone. We're calling it a pause because that's really what it is too. In that space, that's the chrysalis where the caterpillar is melted down to the goo, right? So there's a formlessness to this space. It can be disorienting. You lose your reference points. The things that used to be in certain position maybe have shifted. So it can be disorienting. And as I said, it can be a little bit anxious. But I really do think if you can learn to live with that uncertainty and manage some of the anxiety, the creativity of this time is what will plant the seeds for what shows up next. This is where the seeds are planted in this time. And rather than orienting from the outside, when you're in the chrysalis, you start to orient from the inside. So you start kind of taking your cues from your own imago cells, if we're going to extend the metaphor. There's things that may activate in you when you're not in your comfort zone that either you hadn't been able to hear before or you didn't know before. And there's a freedom in that space because some of the expectations have left. So that's the neutral zone for me. I've heard the expression when, when one door closes, another opens, but the hallways are a bit of a challenge. So I know that this space can be tricky for a lot of us. You mentioned earlier about the wildlife that's showing up maybe in some public places. We're all seeing the news clips of 100 deer that are sitting in the middle of a town square, and wildlife that's free to roam without people around. How are you seeing that in kind of this in between time?
I'm not seeing it personally that much because where I live near in the wilderness.
You get that every day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I've talked to a lot of people and read a lot, and most of us have heard these stories of lions lying in the roads, etc. But the sense is that the intense rush and the energy that we've all been living with this intense rush, is easing.
Yeah.
And it's a huge 180-degree reversal for many of us. And so it's all very upsetting to some degree. But that the earth is almost like breathing.
Yeah.
And we can live a bit again. And it's like we're living this relentless mega machine that somehow relentlessly taking over the earth and our lives, and we're lost in it, busy, rushing, faster. And suddenly we're almost back, for momentarily at least, to the pace of life. Our origins, where we came from, our natural pace. And when we start to talk about new beginnings, the way I think about it anyway, is with new beginnings, it's not going back to the old for us in any way. We're not going back to animals. We're not going back to living on the earth in a certain way. There are too many of us. But as humans, we also have these incredible brains that can reach for the stars. So how do we do both?
Yeah.
From my perspective, much of my job is to try to help connect myself, and then through that with other people, to stay connected to our roots as we reach for the stars, stay connected for our roots as we begin to develop inventions and use our incredible brains. To be incredible caretakers isn't the right word because that's arrogant, but
Do stewards get closer, or is that still caretakers for you?
yes, it is. To my mind,
Mm-hmm.
that's another whole discussion between you and I.
Okay, I'd love to have that. We'll do
Very
that.
creative. How do we express that, and how do we find how do we not say the earth or
Right. Right.
rounding back to your question, it feels like the earth can breathe and we can breathe. And the question is, how do we stop this machine that's taken, and I don't know what other word to use other than machine, these processes, these systems.
Mm-hmm. The momentum.
And how do we bring up enough in ourselves, individually and together, to stay with this? That's the reason you and I wanted to do this now and felt the urgency of it, is to give whatever energy we can put towards the courage and the strength and the wisdom for us humans to stay with this.
Yes.
And see where it leads, and not go back in the negative sense of going back.
That's it exactly. And just to pick up on that point of we are experiencing this individually and collectively. It is happening in both, senses. And so I think that the work is in ourselves to be able to ground, to be able to calm, to be able to sit with not knowing, to practice some of those things that will help us stay present and connected to each other and connected to Earth as we move forward, because it's going to emerge. It's probably going to be different than what any of us might think, in a good way, I believe. But that is the work. The work is on ourselves. Our own life is our work. I happen to believe individual peace eventually leads to world peace. That's just what I think. And so how do we, as you said, that becomes the question and there's lots of ways that we can start to build skill with staying. It's so beautifully put, staying with the truth of this moment. One of it is to be able to hold, paradoxes and to think about two things at once, and to be able to, as you said, ground and reach, right? There's a way of being able, it's an expansive time. Do you feel like
Yes.
there's things
Potentially.
right, right.
Right
Well,
now we're kind of contracting in fear, and the media does not help. The individual human beings, these wonderful things that people are doing, the wonderful concert that was recently happening, and all those things, those are expansive. But that's part of the danger: contract versus expand.
well, it's also part of the old and the new. In
Yeah.
the middle, they both are living. So and maybe that's part of how we learn to manage it, is as we catch and can name that other way, that the energy we've been used to, and decide we don't want that contraction anymore, that we're leaning more into the expansion, then to intentionally find things that make us feel that expansion and contribute to that expansion.
And expansion can be scary. If
Yes.
you're used to contraction, expansion can be terrifying.
Well, I don't know if you noticed in the butterfly video, when the butterfly first comes out of the chrysalis, its first instinct is to crawl up to the top, and then it just hangs there, and it hangs there for hours. My friend said in this case it was 3 hours, and so there's, you can only imagine what thoughts, if caterpillars have thoughts or butterflies have thoughts, but even the new beginning is sort of
thoughts.
yeah. So to be, even in new form, even new beginnings have a weight and a scariness to them, but it's a different kind of scary, I would say. The energy is different when there's anticipation than there is when it's more despair. Or
The other thing is that we're busy speeding faster, 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 looking frantically anywhere except inside ourselves, or anywhere except to our roots into nature. We're looking in the wrong places.
yeah.
And the speeding up, if you're running faster and faster, slowing down is scary because you don't know what you're going to find.
Yeah.
So we need support on all these levels. It's a huge thing for us as humans. It's huge.
It is, and we absolutely need each other.
Oh, yes. And we haven't been well educated in this way either, to move between these different levels of awareness, etc. But yes, to that point, Karen, that's so good that you said that, because this is, the trouble with saying things like we're all in this together over and over again until you hear this from Nike shoes, we're all in this together. But it takes something profound and makes it empty, but it's so true. And that we need each other, and how nourishing it is to have one another.
Yeah.
And we can't do it alone. There's no reason we should do it alone.
Right. I don't think we're meant to.
No.
Right. One of the things that's become obvious in this too is how interconnected we talk about all the time, being interconnected, but even how our systems are so dependent on each other, and we wouldn't last 5 minutes without each other. I mean, we're set up that way. So I think there is work to be done, and like you said, there's fearful parts to it, but there's also incredible opportunity. Who would have imagined we would have a time that's extraordinary like this, where almost the whole world is focused on the same thing at the same time? And I really relate a lot to what you said about the busyness. I've heard that from a lot of people that I've spoken with as well. And that's one of the things people don't want to give up, though. Yes, it's scary to slow down because you don't know what you'll find, but also there's such an exhaustion. There's such an exhaustion.
They don't want to give up what?
They don't want to give up some of the peace they're finding as time goes by. Yeah. So in the beginning, the first few weeks of it were a little more disorienting, and everybody may be thinking it was temporary or however you saw it. But then as you get accustomed to this rhythm, I think people are going to be reluctant to let it go. Several people I've talked to just last week said they're taking walks with their spouse at lunchtime, and it's the first time they've had time together in a long time. And just little gifts, little things that remind us, going back to the very thing you said at the beginning. What's important? What do we value? What does make a good life? How do we measure that? And having a whole new way to measure that
And then
as
when,
we go forward.
yeah, well, to redefine what, not a new
Yes.
measure, to redefine what we mean
Yes.
by measuring and how we measure. Do we
Yes.
measure with the brain? Do we measure with the heart?
Exactly.
How do we measure? But when we move into the new beginnings, we don't know, as you said, we have no idea where it's going to lead. But what I am sure of is if we tune to ourselves and each other, and I don't want to say nature as if it's a thing, the trees and the birds and the grasses and the bushes and the streams and the animals, as we begin to tune to them, one thing I'm sure we will begin to feel, because it's there, is the sense of kinship and the sense of connection. And when you look at another living being, and it doesn't matter what it is, a human, a dog, a tree, and you really connect, it's like a fertilization happens. It's like there's an energy that flows back and forth, nurturing and nourishing. And then we had a little baby deer once who only knew human beings. He had 3 legs, and he was rescued immediately from the road, and he only knew humans. And when people would come to visit, they would stop short. And this is an ordinary deer. Let me rephrase that. In my mind, there's no such thing as any ordinary life form.
Yes.
That's a big mistake on my part. But it was what people would say is an ordinary white-tailed deer. And they would stop short. And they would, I swear, start to glow. He would glow first. And they would start to glow. And there was this glow that went back and forth between the two of them.
Yeah.
And it was almost universal when people came up the driveway and he was the first thing they saw. And then I wondered, he only knew humans. Was a herd animal. And maybe his way of communicating was to begin to glow and open his heart, and that people who came up would recognize that, and so it was glowing back and forth. And I thought, I wonder if that's what it's like to be in a herd.
That's lovely.
And not just a deer herd, a human herd, or, it's the wrong word, but a part of the community of life. Because when you go and walk into a forest in a way that's not aggressive or mindless, but tuning. There's several researchers who would agree with me on this, but I have the feeling that we're welcome. We're not strangers, we're welcome. Our presence, our particular personhood and humanness is a welcome presence as part of the whole harmony. And if we start with that as a new beginning, and connect it to ourselves, and then begin to develop our brilliant, brilliant, brilliant brains, I couldn't tell you, of course I couldn't tell you, none of us can, but I couldn't tell you what might be.
Yeah.
Only that it would be beautiful.
I think that's a lovely place to pause for a moment. If we are we just to check in with Anne where we are on time, but that was beautiful, Susan.
That was, and we actually have some questions that I would like to share with you. And some of these may have already been somewhat answered, but let's start with someone's asking, what are some of the biggest changes an individual can make that benefits all beings and wildlife? That's for both of you.
I was going to give it to Karen.
Oh, that's a whole hour. But so the short answer. I think biggest changes is a big topic, but there are a number of small changes that we can make, and I think each small step takes us in the right direction. And I have always seen change not as being, just a stair step of small changes, but more like a few small changes and then a vertical shift. Things tend to, when you tend to move out in a direction, there tends to be a big shift. I've seen that in a number of cases. So I would say one of the biggest things we can do right now is to cultivate calm. And we've talked about this before, Susan, but that, we all know that fear is a very contagious state. It's a very contagious mental state, and we've been designed this way as humans. It's a survival technique, but we all know what happens if you yell fire into a crowd. It catches quickly. You can train brains quickly to do that. But it turns out that the state of calm is also contagious. And so the things we can do to keep ourselves calm helps ourselves and each other. For example, there are a number of mindfulness techniques that people can employ. I talked to a friend last week who said he's never done anything like this in his life, but he's using this moment as an opportunity, and he picked up an app called Calm, and he's doing it every day. He said it's been 10 days and he's already noticing a big difference in his life with his kids, that he just doesn't get as rattled. So there are so many techniques. Susan, maybe we should do a thing on mindfulness one day, but you can pick any of them. I wouldn't make it a giant to-do list and make it stressful to learn all about it and try and do them all. But it can range from just, taking 3 deep breaths in a moment will reset your nervous system, can help switch you into a calmer mode. Another very simple thing to do is to stop whatever you're doing and to notice 3 things in your environment that you see. Use your senses. So I see a tree out my window, I see a photo that's framed on my desk, and I see Susan's beautiful face. And then you take a breath, and then what can I hear? I can hear, birdsong out my window, and then what do I feel? So use your senses, and you come back in your body, because really presence, staying present and not letting your mind get hijacked into the past or spin out into the future is super useful right now. It's a different.
That's connecting with nature, being in the present. Connecting
Yes.
with nature, that's what you are. It's one of the huge gifts that I keep saying nature because it's a shortcut.
Yeah.
The animals and the trees and the grasses and the breeze and the winds give us.
Yeah.
Did you finish?
Yes.
I was going to just talk about the other half of it. No matter how much we say we love wildlife, if we don't do anything for it, to me it's kind of an empty love. And the one thing we can do more than anything else is leave space for it. And I don't like using the word it either, because it's this massive, wonderful, vibrating, living beings. And that means there's a wonderful book by Duane Elgin called Voluntary Simplicity. He wrote it many years ago and it's still there. Live simply. Buy less. If you buy less, and it doesn't matter if you're a meat eater or a vegan, you're still taking land from animals by growing food. So to be extremely mindful about what we use. The chain is broken for us from what we buy in a store and what the cost was to the earth, not the earth, our earth, the living systems that we come from and are part of. So to be extremely mindful of what we use and where it comes from. But the most practical thing as an answer to that question is to save land. And saving a little parcel here and there, it doesn't do anything, because life flows and it needs to flow just like we need to flow. It needs to be able to move a little parcel here and there. Even the Yellowstone grizzlies in Yellowstone will go extinct, because Yellowstone, big as it is, if it's not connected, they'll eventually inbreed and die. So saving land carefully in terms of what wildlife actually needs. We used to say, well, we give them the rock and the ice where people don't want to be. So being mindful of and educating ourselves where not to build, how to build differently in our communities, how to redesign our communities so we can have tiny wildlife corridors even within a community. We can interweave wildlife with human civilization.
Nice.
Great answers. I have another question. This one is for Susan. What kind of wisdom do you receive from the wild or the wild animals that can help us transition?
I'm trying to
It's not a language thing. That's, you have to translate from the non-verbal to verbal. Yeah.
yeah. I would say some of it, a way we might be able to translate it is what do we get when we spend time with our dog or our cat? It's profound and it's nonverbal. Just the feeling of being next to them or seeing them. They're not wild, but they're another step closer to the wild, which is my feeling of why we want them so much. They connect us to something other than humans. And if we only connect it to humans, we're actually profoundly lonely. And so we're connecting to the dogs and cats. And that sense of companionship is actually available to us from any living being. We don't know it because we don't have the time or feel the safety to spend time with a bear or a wolf usually, but energetically it's there. So I would say the most profound wisdom I've gotten is the profound sense of companionship that's available to us all the time, everywhere. You know, if you cut a leaf, inside that leaf is an entire universe of algae and protozoans and fungi, an entire community in one leaf. We have access to a leaf in the middle of New York City. We have access to this sense of companionship anywhere, a goldfish, plant, anywhere. What's I see more than a lot of people in the sense that I spend more time with them is just that. When people come to visit our bears or our wolves who aren't afraid of people, they want to meet us. They want to. Because life recognizes life and life connects with life. We're all equally curious about one another. So I would, in summary, I'd say the sense of companionship and the sense of curiosity and recognizing and exulting in one another. Wow, there's bears on the earth and there are humans on the earth, and who are they and how do they think and how does a butterfly think, and all of that is just miraculous. And then you're so lost in wonder that you forget about the other stuff. I mean, it comes back crashing quickly enough, but you know.
That's great. We have about 4 more minutes. Let me send you a few more questions. Are there some books that you either of you or both of you would recommend so that we can get started? Who are you reading? Who do you suggest?
I'm just laughing because I've got towers of books from floor to ceiling in my tiny little cabin.
Me too.
So I wouldn't know how to begin. Do you want to learn about trees? Do you want to learn about octopuses? Do you want to learn about our that we're actually multi-billion celled beings? We're not just what we think we are at all. Do you want to learn the incredible books on like sacred economics, it goes to the root kind of things I was talking about before. That's Charles Eisenstein. What we can do is we can, I'll finish my thought in a second, but just to remind myself, this is going to be recorded. We can send a list of books. And what I would recommend that any of you want to communicate with us and tell us what you might be interested in. Like with Charles Eisenstein's Sacred Economics is returning to a gift economy, which might seem incredibly radical, but so did staying at home 3 months ago. They're just remarkable. I can't even begin. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, I'm a total bookworm as well. I have a large stack of fiction and nonfiction going. I would say, just out of the topic from this conversation on the individual side, that Bridges book, Transitions, is to me the go-to. Like I said, I've read it many, many times, and it really does kind of walk through what that personal process feels like. I'm also currently reading Drinking from the River of Light by Mark Nepo. I really like him a lot. So yeah, just depending on if you're looking for more I have stacks as well. Looking for more. I don't know if people want more individual or big picture or both. So I like your suggestion, Susan. Maybe we can just throw some titles and people can choose.
There's philosophy, there's learning about the language of trees, such a wide variety.
Yeah.
And all of them, as with anything that's truly connected to the line of life, got that energetic quality, all of them lead to the same place.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter that much where you're coming from. If the author is connected to earth and to his or her writing, it's going to come through and lead us to the same fundamental truths.
And it's a great question, because the time in the pause is a great time to be reading. This is a time to be reaching for teachers, reaching for, waking things up inside. So I applaud the question.
Great. And we have another person who's feeling overwhelmed, wanting to know what kind of steps can be taken to stop this feeling of helplessness and powerlessness.
Yeah.
That comes from only one part of our brain. That means that we haven't quite activated other parts yet, where we get to see opportunity or ways around or connect to our own strength. One of the ways, so there's some really good books on that. But one of the first things you can do is to breathe and feel your connectedness, the roots to the earth. There's a nourishment and a calming that comes from there. If you have a garden, to garden. If you don't have a garden, to go get a house plant, if you will. But something that connects us. The powerlessness comes from a sense of us being alone. And actually we're connected to it, all of life, where there's tremendous creativity. We're an expression of it, and we are it, and we're our own creative selves too. So creativity means seeing pathways around. So breathing and doing some kind of connection to whatever nature, I don't know where the person lives. Because the answers will come if you can stay with it long enough.
Yeah, and I would say that for me, I know personally, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, it's often because I'm trying to bite off a bigger piece than I can manage at that time. And so having a way to break things into smaller pieces can sometimes, when there's times of great upheaval, it can be, you can feel like you have nothing to hold on to, and everything needs to change and be done, but you don't have to do it all yourself. And so having that sense of grounding, like Susan said, being able to ground, and then also just do something small. There's just a lot of power in just doing one thing to change you out of that mode. I have a friend right now who goes and sits in her car in the garage for 10 minutes and listens to music, because that helps her ground again. It helps her get calm again. So, there's time, there's going to be, this is going to unfold over time to come up with our big plans and to kind of figure out where we're going. But in this moment where, we're in a lot of uncertainty, I think it's okay to give yourself permission to be kind with yourself right now. None of us really know. We're all kind of feeling some levels of this. And so to give yourself that permission to just do something small and caring for yourself and your environment.
And uncertainty in and of itself is okay. We're not used to knowing that that's okay.
Yeah, we're going to learn. That's going to be part of this, I think. It's the truth. And one last thing, sorry, is that there's peace in the truth, right? When you realize that something's true. So even facing an ending, when you put it off and you don't look at it, but you look at it and there's truth there. Just the same with this is the truth is we aren't certain. That's the truth. And there's peace in that too, or there can be. Sorry, Anne, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I think that was a great way to end our program today on such a good feeling of hopefulness. And with that, I'm going to close the questions. And let's move to kind of closing thoughts from Susan and Karen. We currently do not have a firm schedule for Susan's Cabin in the Woods. However, we will be announcing future programs through our social media platforms and our website. You're also welcome to, when you visit our website, sign up for newsletters. You will receive notices about upcoming talks and webinars. Susan, Karen, you want to give us some closing thoughts?
I think, as I mentioned, this is a time of immense possibility. And for myself, I have a sense also of intense curiosity. How is this going to unfold? And sometimes I ask myself, what can I contribute to this? And other times I say, that's actually not a good question. A better question is just follow what feels right. And then I'll be contributing what it is that I myself, that's unique to me, can contribute. And I think if we all contribute what's unique to us, there's this beautiful harmony, because each of us is a different vibration, unique, completely unique. And together there's a possibility of having this beautiful symphony, but we need each of ourselves as one of the instruments of vibrations in it. And the idea of adding that to the human resonance or harmony and concert, and then be part of nature. It's just so exciting to think. And then to use our brilliant brains and creativity to see where we go with that. What incredible things we might, I don't know if invent is the right word, but discover, and works of art we might create, and new relationships and new understandings of the nature of life. And sometimes I think as part of our human journey, as we are increasing in consciousness, and hopefully we shift our consciousness from fear to this other way of thinking, that is the universe itself waking up, and that we're part of that process, or that we are the universe dancing with itself as we begin to evolve. And to me, that's just immensely exciting.
I will just say I'm also very hopeful, and waiting. I'm personally stirring more toward that emergent beginnings and out of this cocoon pause phase, and I'm waiting to see what is waiting for us, or even waiting within us, to see what we can create. And I am also very hopeful. So I'll just leave it at that.
Waiting within us, that's beautiful.